fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Oh, welcome back into the House of Mystery. And I'm Al Warren, and we've got Mr. Joe Goldberg here in the house.
I am in the house, Al. I'm in the house. I'm actually battling a fly in the house. I don't want to get into it, but right now he's winning. I'm trying to write.
I would expect him to win because the squirrel won, right?
Yes, that's right. The squirrels dodged me, but I'm trying to write. I'm having a good writing day, and then something's crawling on my leg. I don't know if anyone else feels, but that's annoying. That's a concentration breaker.
Depends what's crawling on the leg.
That's true. Well, you had your chance.
Well, I did, but, I'm old and can't see things. Can't find my way around the room, We have a returning writer sitting in with us today, and he's going to talk about what it's like to live in Maine and how bad it really is. And he wants to get out of there. So, and his he's got a newest book, and it's called City Gone Askew. And it's a Brooklyn 8 Ballo Mystery Book 2. Holy cow, that's too much for me. I've got a brain freeze. Matt Cost, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. And, as Maine is already considered part of Canada, why don't we just cross over and become part of Canada?
Well, come on over. We're friendly. We have to build a wall, but on the south of your border.
Keep the Iowans out, like me.
Yeah. That's really scary.
Those vacation spots.
But we don't need any Hawkeyes up there, huh?
Hey. Our head coach once coached in Maine, so.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Is Maine really important to you when you write? Does it get into your books totally, like all Maine? Are you a Maine kind of writer?
I do have a couple series that are based here in Maine. My Mainly Mysteries and my Clay Wolf Trap series are both Maine-based books, so there's obviously a lot of Maine in those books, but with City Gone Askew, I'm branching down into the big city, and it's based in Manhattan.
How does that happen?
Wow.
Yeah.
I have a daughter that lives in Brooklyn, so I decided to, set this really down in Brooklyn. We go over into Manhattan for a little bit, a few excursions, but it's really Brooklyn-based, and my daughter lives down there, so I figure I can go visit her, and when she's tired of seeing me, which is most of the time, I can go do some research.
I was going to say, you must get a lot of research done.
Yeah.
20 minutes and you're out. It's the situation of where it's located really important. You focus on that in the story.
As you both know as writers, when you can add a real level of sincerity to something. So in City Gone Askew, 2 day trips of mine, well, 1 day trip and 1 night trip, were very fruitful. Going across to what is now Roosevelt Island in the East River, which is a real upscale, ritzy sort of neighborhood. But back in the 1920s, it was known as Damnation Island or Welfare Island. And that's where all the undesirables, poor prisoners and poor hospital patients and just poor people in general were all scraped together and put there. The bridge actually went over the top of it, and the only way to get on the island was to take an elevator down from the bridge to Damnation Island, and that's pretty much where you live. So visiting that was very important.
The setting is also in the 1920s.
Yes, absolutely. The first one, Velma Gone Awry, was 1923, and now we've moved up to 1924. So I know that, Al, you've written some books in that time period as well, maybe based over in Chicago.
Right. That was from memory, too.
Yeah. Used your diary.
Yeah.
Hey, Matt, let me ask you a question about the historical fiction element. Let's start with locations. We're talking locations. You can go back, you can visit things, but it's 60, 70, 100 years ago. How do you bring to life the location that's decades ago?
One thing that I came across that I don't know if you use, but newspapers.com archives online all the newspapers for all of time. So when I started writing this series, Velma Gone Awry, the first one in the series, I started reading the Brooklyn Eagle. I have a character that works for the Brooklyn Eagle, so I chose that newspaper. And I read it every day for 2 years now, 1923 and 1924, and, skimmed some of the more dry articles, but coming across, what refrigerators cost and looked like and brands and women's fashion and, what movies were playing and all of these things really helped set me right there in the middle of things. So to bring me back in time and put me into 1923, 1924 Brooklyn, that's a fantastic way to do it for me.
How about dialogue and the way people speak?
Yeah, that's, you got to kind of be careful to not overdo it and figure it out. I've got a couple different books and done some online things about slang of the time and whatnot, but you have to realize that it's all different depending on who the person is. So it's a very diverse group in this. 8 Ballo is a Hungarian detective, and he's friends with a black business entrepreneur and a Jewish journalist at the Brooklyn Eagle and an Irish cop, Stephen McGee. All of their slang is going to be different, and I sort of choose on the side of putting just a little bit in, just enough to give the flavor of it, but not so much as to leave the reader struggling to understand what they're saying.
Yeah, it can be difficult, but you got to get it right. So what's the premise? Let's talk about the premise so people pick up what happens in this mystery.
First of all, my detective, my PI, is, as I said, a Hungarian immigrant parents, and he's the 8th child born, and his mother was so sure that he was going to be a girl to even the scales at 4 girls and 4 boys in the family, that she had a name picked out for him, Marguerite. But when he turned out to not be a girl, but to, have more anatomy than that, she was unsure as to what to call him, so she merely wrote down the numeral 8 on the birth certificate, meaning to change it later. And she obviously never did, so 8 Ballo is the numeral 8. Ballo is his name. In this book, City Gone Askew, it starts off with a widow coming to his office in Bushwick, Brooklyn, to hire him to prove that her husband had been murdered and that it had not been an accidental death when he'd been run down on the street by an automobile. And the police had just said that it was an accidental death, but she's convinced that he was murdered. And then as the pages leak their way along, she kind of comes around to sharing that he was also carrying a priceless Aquila at the time, which is an ancient Roman legion standard that 2,000 years ago the Roman legions would carry into battle as their standard. And it's a gold eagle about 2 feet high by, a foot wide. And there's none left in the world as we know it. But this ancient Aquila had been handed down through an ancient order of the Batavi, who are a Germanic tribe who defeated the Roman legions in 70 AD and took this. And, that's all historically accurate. And then I start to fictionalize that. And the Batavi go underground and hand this standard down from generation to generation until it ends up on the streets of Brooklyn being hidden after World War I. And so that sort of touches us all off. And we go from there into much more complex areas such as the eugenics movement. The Klan gets involved, and we even have some Nazis swirling around. So it's quite a passel of people that 8 Ballo is faced against.
So how do you come up with these stories? I know your stories. I read, and you have different series, and you have the historical fiction. How do you come up with these stories? The
basis for City Gone Askew really started with the 3rd book in my Clay Wolf Trap series, which was Mousetrap, which was about genome editing or changing the DNA in the embryo, which is being done today. At that point, I realized that it had its roots back in the eugenics movement, which was very big in the United States in the early 1900s. So as I kind of got into researching that more and more, this book developed in my mind's eye, and I started to think about it. And then as I came to realize that Adolf Hitler based a lot of his thought process on this eugenics movement that was going on in the United States in the early 1900s into the 1920s. And it was really only after Hitler and World War II occurred and he was exposed for the monster that he was, that the eugenics movement kind of fell out of favor in the United States. Right up until that point, it was, largely heralded as a great thing.
So, but these stories are, how do you piece them together? Because you just threw out a lot of different. One of those is a story, is a book, and so you put them, you piece them all together, and I guess from a writer's point of view, what's your structure to piece those things together? How do you keep it going?
I very much as writers are planners and pantsers. I'm pretty firmly on the pantser side of things, and I let my characters lead me for sure. So, I had the idea of the eugenics movement being something I wanted to write into, but I wasn't sure how to lead into that. And I kind of just threw in some other history I knew about the Roman legion standards and the Aquilas to sort of get the foot in the door of the eugenics movement and possibly a connection between Germans and eugenics people in the United States. And as you go, things just sort of build into that. And, the perfect companions for these Germans who are slowly turning into Nazis. It hasn't come full circle into being called Nazi Party yet. It's just happening. Hitler's just gone to jail and he's about to be released. But the perfect partner for them is the Klan. So, then we're off into the Klan. So we're, going between these three really large hate groups, getting together to perhaps change the course of the world if it's not stopped. So it certainly gets, my PI into a bit of thriller territory and not just mystery territory, but that's the direction it went. So that's the direction we went.
So how do you relate to your characters, your main characters? What kind of relationship do you have with them, or how would you describe it?
You know them less in the first book, and in each succeeding books, you get to know them better. And, I would say all have traits of me, but none of them are me. 8 Ballo is this really large Hungarian who, my daughter tells me woke is passé and out of style these days, but he's woke before his time. And so, I developed that as a character, and then every situation he enters into, it's like, how would he react to that? And I figure out how his reaction would be, and then I know something more about him, and on to the next event, and you learn something more about him until, by book 2, I'm getting to know him better. I have one series that I've got the 6th book coming out in November, and I know those characters very well. I think it develops over time.
Right. But so when you're doing this, like you say, 6-book series and things like this is book 2. Is this all mapped out in your mind, kind of at the beginning, middle, and end sort of thing, and you're just kind of working your way there, or is this completely sit down and do it and it goes as it goes?
I develop an outline of 40 chapters because I'm shooting for approximately 80,000 words on the end of my first draft, and each of my chapters is approximately 2,000 words long. And in that outline, I have 3 events that are going to occur in that chapter, and that outline is mostly blank. And the first thing I will fill in is the 5th chapter, because that's going to be the hook. That's going to be a major event, because over time I've come to the conclusion that every 12.5% of a book, or in my case, every 10,000 words, some major climatic event has to happen. And the first one is at 12.5%, and that's the hook. At 25%, the protagonist has a greater understanding what's going on. So back to your question, the only thing on that outline might be what happens in the 5th chapter, because that's the climatic point that I'm going to write the first 4 chapters rising up to. And that helps me drive forward. And then when I get through that 5th chapter, I say, okay, what's going to happen in the 10th chapter? That's going to be the 25% climatic moment. And I'll figure that out, and I'll put that into the outline. And then I'll start driving towards that. So most of the chapters, the outline gets filled in after I write the chapter, after the characters lead me wherever they're going to lead me.
I had read that you'd said that, and I thought about, I'm in the process of writing a book right now. I think that's a great, from the point of view of structure, because I call myself a plantser. I kind of plan and I kind of write.
Yeah.
I actually am writing along to, I'm going to test that and see, do I have something happening at those points? Because I call them signposts. I'm writing towards a signpost. Okay. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I got to get to that spot. But I don't have it quite as mapped out as you have in your writing the outline, the chapters beforehand. So I'm going to try that, and I'll give you some feedback on how it works for me, because everybody has their own style. But I like the idea that something has to happen because you have to keep the people entertained, right? That's why you write, keep them entertained.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, the chapters don't all end up being 2,000 words. It's an average. I might have a 600-word chapter or a 3,500-word chapter, and what not the case. But keeping that roadmap is important for me. And, you call them signposts. I always look upon it as a roller coaster. And we reached that 12.5% mark at 10,000 words, and boom, we hit the top. And then we're going down the other side, and we start rising back up to the 20,000 word mark, and boom, big climatic moment. And then we start rising again. So I always think of it as a roller coaster, but I like signposts as well.
I like roller coaster too. I mean, it's how do you bring the reader in? So I want to go back to one of my questions on the various pieces, and you used whatever, but beyond the character and the setting, is there something thematic that you want the reader to get out besides being entertained? I felt like there was. Maybe I'm wrong.
Absolutely. I mean, the entire eugenics movement is, a part of our history that, we try and ignore to a certain extent, and some people still favor and whatnot. But, whether it's the eugenics movement or in, my big moment, and, another place that I visited was the back room of the back room, which is a speakeasy. And in the back room of that, Charlie Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, and Bugsy Siegel planned Murder Incorporated and laid the foundation for the modern mafia. And so what they want from 8 Ballo is to rescind the Reed-Johnson Act of 1924, which put a severe restriction on immigrants from everywhere but Western and Northern Europe. Lansky and Luciano are mostly interested in the immigrants, the Jewish immigrants and the Italian immigrants, but the Asians and African immigrants have been stopped totally. And, it's funny to see the parallels between 100 years ago and now, and some of the issues and problems that we're having as to immigration and what we want to do and what we don't want to do. So I try and, not get too political involved, but just lay it out there and let people decide what they will. But eugenics and immigration and all of that is tied very closely together.
Yeah, I was going to say, good thing we don't have those problems anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
What point of view you write this from? Which character, or do you do it from an outside point of view? Like, how do you take on a story like this?
I do it somewhat omniscient, but it's from, 8 Ballo is my primary character, but I will have parts of the book from other characters' points of view. It's, the third person omniscient. I just wrote the first draft of a book, which is going to be my first person that I've ever tried. So that was something new for me to do, and we'll see how that pans out.
Yeah, I'm doing first person female right now. Once you get into the character, it's kind of fun. Yeah, but you got to learn them. But so you sort of, I kept finding myself bouncing back and forth as I'm writing from first to third person until I said, okay, stop doing that. But I do enjoy it now because you get into the character. And I have some third person chapters too, but I like that first person thing. But I wanted to go back and ask, because you have a following and you have these different topics and you have themes. So I'm wondering, how often is your readership, your loyal readership, looking over your shoulder as you're reading? Do you think about the reader as you're writing?
I guess I do a little bit, but probably not quite enough. it's certainly not a cozy series, but if there's anything closer to cozy than in my writing, it would be my mainly mysteries. And then just recently, last year in August, I came out with a mainly wicked, which took a real dark turn into, sort of Al Warren territory. Where,
what are you trying to say?
They're the no seller.
Where we had a grotto from the, Church of Satan that was so radical they were kicked out of it. And things just kind of, and the characters and story kept leading me down that path. So I've always been a little concerned about the readers that read the first 4 books and ran into that 5th book and said, whoa.
Reputation.
Well, that's something, though. I mean, that is something. I mean, because you may lose them,
right.
You want to keep them, or that's not a small topic when it comes to being writing. But do you write for yourself? Do you write for the reader? Do you write for the enjoyment? All those things are mixed together, but you know it.
I write primarily for myself, and I write what I want to write. If I was, writing for the reader primarily, I would probably be more successful but less happy. So along those lines, in the mainly wicked, really terrible story is this elderly lady who's probably 95 years old had gotten my cell phone number, and I was down in South Carolina spending some time for the winter a couple years back when I was writing this. And she called me up and said that she really loved my books, and, the 4 mainly books that came first, Power, Fear, Money, were just angst were just fantastic, and how she loved them. And then she explained where she lived in Brunswick, which is where the books are set. And she explains the very house that she lives in, and I realized that I've just killed somebody there. And I felt absolutely horrible that I've killed somebody in her house. So that took a dark turn, but that's the sort of thing that mainly wicked, the path it took.
You have always got more books planned in this series then.
Yeah, I'm bouncing around with a lot of different series right now. I've got the 2 main based ones. I've got these 2 out now. I have a series coming out with Level Best Books in April, which is going to be more of a international thriller series, modern day Robin Hood sort of thing, where Max Creed, my hero, leads a band of merry men, or not so merry men, in trying to bring justice to the poor against the ultra wealthy. And so I've got that first book with them, and I'm writing the second one to be released. As I told you, I have another book that I just finished the draft of a first person, and that one's going to be set in 1955 Raleigh, North Carolina, with a PI named Jazz Jones. So I now sort of have 5 different series going, and I'm not sure, which ones I'll pursue and which ones might take a little break, or we'll see.
You're killing me, Matt. I'm a book a year guy if I'm lucky. and you write them when you wake up in the morning and go to bed at night. Book done.
Well, you got a lot of other things going on. I don't have much of a life, Joe. So.
Oh no, because you're a writer, and I am whatever the heck I am. But it's impressive. And you wrote the historical fiction stuff. Like Joshua Chabon is one of my favorite Civil War characters that time too. So you've jumped from historical fiction and mystery and PI and crime murder. What do you like about each piece? How do you classify yourself?
I was a history major in college. I taught history and middle school level for 10 years before they paroled me and let me go off to be a writer. And so I do love the history. But I've always loved mysteries, from Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew and the Bobbsey twins and the Great Pain, all the way up through people like Elmore Leonard and Carl Hyacin, and Robert Parker. So those are 2 loves that I've always had. And that's kind of where, I'd been writing some historical fiction and some mystery series. And that's where the idea was really the inspiration for Velma Gone Awry was the first in my Brooklyn 8 Ballo series was, hey, I should combine the 2 loves of my life, histories and mysteries, and make a historical PI mystery. And I've been having so much fun doing that I've started another historical PI mystery in Raleigh, North Carolina in 1955, which, by the way, is where my son lives. So I can do research and visit my son. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, is really enjoying writing the historical mysteries and some thrillers.
How do you bring in these historical characters in your books? Like when you talk about some of the legendary figures that are mentioned, Bugsy Siegel and stuff like that. Do you actually use dialogue for them, or do you bring them in from a distance? How do you handle that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I put dialogue in their mouths and, on occasion thoughts in their heads and whatnot. So I know that veers it away from nonfiction for sure. But you try and be as accurate as possible, especially if you do care about history like I do. Whereas you want to really understand who Bugsy Siegel was and Meyer Lansky. They play a primary role in Velma Gone Awry, and then they come back for City Gone Askew. But, they're a couple young Jewish kids that are just tough as anything. And when I write about them, they're already running a gang in Brownsville, and they're 18, 19 years old. And you just realize how tough these kids are. And then they hook up with Luciano, because Luciano used to beat up Lansky every day when they were both young, and Lansky just kept coming back for more. And so they became friends when they were younger. And now they're sort of bonding together, these gangs of Jewish people and Italian people, and putting them together. And that's kind of laying this foundation. So understanding who they are is really important to what they're going to do and things like that. I think the same holds true for a lot of the other characters. Dorothy Parker becomes a huge character in this series just because she's so colorful and so witty and such a personality that we meet her in the first chapter of Velma Gone Awry, and she's refused to leave the pages since. So she's has a big presence in both books.
How do you get it to where you feel comfortable with the dialogue then? Like, what is it? Do you ever feel like sometimes it's corny when you do it? It doesn't seem realistic and you have to redo it, I always find that interesting when you're using people that were actually alive.
Yeah, I've always wished that I could do voices better, because I think if because I've always found that reading things aloud give me a good feel on it. And like you're saying, if I'm trying to do it from the perspective of an Italian gangster or, a Jewish gangster or whatever, the dialogue would be slightly different. So it'd probably be good to have, some person really good with voice read it aloud to me. So perhaps you've just given me an idea for future use, but other than that, so far I've just tried to do the best I can and be as careful as I can.
Yeah. No, that's all you can do.
I just want to ask you about the marketing side, because you got a lot of books here. How do you market these, not confuse the readers, or what? How do you do it? How do you keep them all straight and let the people know what you got at the current time?
It's a tough one, but at this point I've been releasing 3 books a year. And so every 4 months I have a new book come out, and it's starting to fall into a pattern for every, my daily pattern is write in the morning and then work on editing the book that has already been finished. And you're still working on the editing in the afternoon prior to moving on to marketing the book that came before that you're trying to get out in front of, radio personalities, podcasters, reviewers, venues to visit. So, I do a lot of New England libraries and bookstores. I've hit, I think it's 37 different cost talks, I call them, over the past 3 months. So I've been busy on that. And so at any given point, I'll be writing one book, editing another, sometimes 2 others, depending on where the process is at, and marketing a book, and then doing promotions where I go out and do interviews or do talks. So it's kind of rounds my day and allows me to do a lot of different things in the course of the day. Whereas I know both of you have things that round your days as well as your writing. So I think it's important.
Well, let's talk about your social media and website and everything else. Where do people find Mr. Matt?
Matt Cost finds me most places. The website's www.mattcost.net. Facebook is, mattcost.3 or something like that. Instagram gets a little strange because I threw in, my middle name there. So it's M. Langdon Cost. Matt Cost, M. Langdon Cost. They'll find me in most places.
Listen, it's been a pleasure. It's always fun talking to you. And City is gone askew. And it's Brooklyn 8, Ballo, Mystery, Book 2. Matt Cost. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you both for having me.
Thanks, man. Talk to you later.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.